Hi, good afternoon. Hello, my friends. Y'all follow that TikToker, and I cannot remember her name. I should probably give her a shout out though, so I'm not like using her trademark. But she's that Indian lady, and she's freaking hysterical, and she always goes, "Hello, my friends." So funny. It makes me laugh every time. It's brilliant, and I wish I had thought of it. If we haven't met yet, I'm Bree. I am an ICU nurse practitioner, and this is a Get Ready With Me, where I put on makeup and talk about what's happening in the world of nurse practitionering. Sometimes it's professional stuff, and sometimes it's like educational stuff. I'm ICU, so it tends to have an ICU focus. Today, you're going to sense a theme here. If you watch any of these back, or if you're following them live, you will realize that I really don't have my act together. I mean, Adderall helps, but it's really not together. So it's really kind of just fly by the seat of my pants, even though I have all the best intentions to be organized. Hey, Mr. Midwife, glad to see you here. I typically write a blog post once a week. It's usually like I start working on it Friday, Saturday. I have time to like research and just put a lot of brain cells into it and create the best content for everybody, right? That's my goal. And then I do these lives to like kind of talk about the same topic, and it bounces back and forth. Like 1 week professional, 1 week it's going to be clinical. Well, last week was crazy for us. My husband and I had some friends in from out of town, and we had a little shindig at our house. So everything halted in the world of Bree and P, and it came back to focusing on the family, which is important. It's important. But we are 11th hour people. I get a lot done in the 11th hour. So our house looks great. Did a lot of things that we've been putting off for a while, but I created no blog content. So the topic for today is going to be VBGs and ABGs and how to convert them, when they are valid and when they are invalid, why they are used preferentially in the ED, a little bit of background on that. And depending on how long the topic goes and how much we talk, I might start talking a little bit about how I use ABGs to make a determination about intubation. So we'll just see how things go. Hey, Scott, glad you're here. I really encourage everybody that's on here live to jump in, throw some comments in, questions, even if it's not about the topic we're talking about. I can kind of roll with the punches. Adderall's on board, so I can do it. Having said that, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, my point was, I literally just finished this article 2 hours ago. The good news is it's fresh on my mind. The bad news is I'm like 3 days late getting out to everybody. Yeah, it's just the way it's been this week. It's just the way it's been. I've also got I'm trying to stick to a deadline for myself on getting out my second book. I haven't quite met it, but I feel like if I get it out my goal was February, and in my mind it was mid-February, but I didn't set an actual date. So I feel like if I get it out by the end of February, I'm still, meeting my deadline. So trying to give myself a little grace there, but anyways, you get the point. It's crazy around here. Okay, so VBGs and ABGs. ABGs I know, but I've never used VBGs. I'm looking forward to learning something. Maybe it's because you've been out. So for those of you who haven't met Nurse Scott, he is a former ER nurse who's an FNP student currently. He has a YouTube channel. Go check it out. But I was about to say I'm really surprised, but I forgot you haven't worked in the ER in a while. But something shifted. I was a former ER nurse in a different lifetime ago, a long time ago. I don't remember us doing many VBGs then, but something happened in the last few years where I think it was probably around like 2010. There were a lot of articles that came out that suggested that VBGs were a good surrogate for an ABG. And in the ED, where things are very fast paced, you got to like get results really, really quick and do something with them. They became like the standard, and I don't know. Okay, here's the thing. I started this blog post out, and this is how I wrote it. Okay, there are 2 things that are true in most hospitals in America. One is this: the ER nurse is going to deliver an alive patient to the ICU. They're alive, or in some state of aliveness, but they are a mess. The lines are all a mess. They're dirty. The clothes are half cut off. And the second tenet of truth to this is that the ICU nurse is going to be irritated as crap because everything's a mess. And they're going to completely overlook the fact that the patient is, in fact, somewhat alive. It's just the yin and yang of ER and ICU. And ABG versus VBG is the same thing. Like, ED docs are going to order a VBG. ICU doctor can come downstairs and say, that doesn't mean anything, and order an ABG. So I'm like, which is better? I see arguments on both sides of this, in part for the number one, because I was a ER nurse, so I know why it's important to deliver an alive patient to the ICU, and you shouldn't hone in on stupid stuff. But I also understand from the ICU standpoint why that matters. So same thing with the VBG, ABG. I get it. I get both sides of it. So I'm going to be unbiased and present an argument for both here and tell you, in some respects, a defense about why that ICU provider then comes downstairs and says, go ahead and get an art stick. And the RT goes, are you kidding me? We just got a VBG, and everybody's annoyed by it. There's a reason for it. Okay, so Scott says, because our job in the ED is to pretty up the patient. Exactly. I mean, if they don't arrive with a full report on exactly everything that's happened in their life, a full med review, and clean, did you do anything, really? Alive only just, but alive. Exactly. I don't know. I think it's really great if you have the opportunity as a nurse to cross-train in both areas, because you learn different things in different places, and there is inherent value in it. I started my career in the ER, and it taught me so much about how to look at a patient that you know literally nothing about and come to a differential diagnosis about what could be happening and how to triage people. And that's something that, ICU nurses don't get. So it's yin and yang. It's a great balance, I think, if you want to do both, but most people don't, because they tend to be one personality type or the other. I would call myself a messy type A. I don't know. Okay, so ABG, VBG. Here's the thing. There are a lot of pros to a VBG. They're fast. They have less risk to the patient. They're easier to obtain. So in a lot of respects, it expedites care of the patient. Okay, again, this is coming across unbiased. Do you see it? It's very unbiased. The things that are helpful to get from a VBG are going to be your electrolytes. So hemoglobin, potassium, lactate. Very, very quick way to get an assessment of what your critical lab values are. It's very useful in the ED setting. It's very useful in the ICU setting. It's very useful in a rapid response or code setting where you need answers really, really quick. Preferentially, an ABG, I feel like, is a little more valid. So I will tell you the standard of why an ABG is used and then kind of backtrack to why people substitute a VBG. An ABG is obviously arterial blood that is drawn that gives you an indication of what is being delivered to the tissue, right? So this is what, if I am a kidney, this is what I am seeing. This is blood that has been returned to the heart, passed through the lungs, and then gotten gas exchange, carbon dioxide offloaded, O2 onloaded, and then pumped out to the body. So this will tell you very pretty accurately whether or not there is a tissue demand or tissue ischemia problem. So do I have an issue where I have poor cardiac output? Do I have an issue where I have low hemoglobin? Something that is telling me what the tissues, what the organs are getting, and how severe a problem is, right? So you're going to get a pH, you're going to get a PCO2, you're going to get a PO2, and you're going to get those electrolytes. I leave off the bicarb because the HCO3, aka bicarb, in my organization is a calculated number. Every ABG, one number has to be calculated, either the PCO2 or the bicarb, and it tends to be the bicarb. So that is not an actual reflection of what the bicarb is. Some places, some cultures I've worked in, substitute a base deficit or base excess for the bicarb. I like to just look at a CMP. Get your CMP and look at what your bicarb, CO2, it's written as CO2 on a CMP, it's written as HCO3 on a ABG, which took me a little while to kind of get that. But they're both bicarb, just in different ways, different different saturations, different places in the blood plasma levels. So they're written differently, but it's the same thing. Okay. So bicarb on a CMP, your CO2, is going to tell you whether or not there's a state of chronic acidosis happening. So your COPD is probably going to have a chronically alkalotic, like the CO2 is going to be high, 40s, high 30s, 40s, because their body that's the kidney bicarb. That's the kidney's response to compensating for all all that acid from not being able to blow off CO2 on your ABG. So anyways, all that to say that an arterial sample is going to give me an accurate reflection of the oxygenation status, the PCO2, and the pH, which are important for a multitude of reasons. One of which is deciding intubation, but there are many other reasons why we would look at that. So that's just some backstory on why you would get an ABG. Now, ABGs are hard to get, right? You got to stick an artery. It's particularly in people who have poor perfusion, their blood pressure is low. It's hard. You may not always be able to have an RT that can quickly run in there and get something. You may have to do a deeper femoral stick to get it. You may have to place a line. It's much more time consuming. It's more painful for the patient. It's closer to a nerve. Patients just notoriously gripe about it because it hurts and it just takes longer. So if you have a peripheral line that is drawing blood back or central line, you can draw a VBG like in 2 seconds, right? It's already there. You can draw it in 2 seconds, run it. You've got results very quickly. So that's why the ED tends to default to that. There is good evidence to support the fact that in a hemodynamically stable, non-hypoxic, non-ventilated, like mechanically ventilated patient, that these numbers correlate well with what an ABG would show. But in your mind, if you're looking at anything other than the hemoglobin or the potassium or the lactate or any of the electrolytes, if you're looking at anything else, if you're looking at the pH or the PCO2, don't even look at the PO2. I don't even look at a PO2 on a VBG. I don't even look at it. But the PCO2 and the pH, in my mind, and in most people's mind, you want to convert it to what it would correlate to in the arterial sample so that you can kind of get a better clinical reference for what it means, because the values are different, right? Arterial blood is what the tissues are seeing delivered to it. Venous blood is what is being returned to the heart after the tissue has extracted all of that oxygen and dumped CO2 back into the bloodstream. So you've got to correct for those factors, the post-delivery phase, if you will. Okay, let me stop for just a minute. Tell us your thoughts. Don't hold back. Yeah, I know. So this is something that my colleagues will tell you is that I'm definitely not a wallflower. I do tend to share thoughts, but again, I'm trying to be biased on this, not be biased on this one, because it's good to present differing viewpoints. I love drawing ABGs. I prefer the brachial. So where you're at, nurses still draw ABGs. This is interesting because when I worked in a level 1 center here in Atlanta, we drew our own arterial samples as well. We couldn't put in lines, but we could do ABGs. But everywhere else I worked after that as a nurse, nurses were not allowed to do it, only RTs. And I don't fully understand what the rationale for that is. It could have been a situation that at this level 1, there was like 1 RT for 20 something patients, and they basically did road trips all day. So maybe they just didn't have the staff to do it. I don't know. Ouch, ABGs are painful. I've never had one, but I have heard. So I do believe it is painful. Scott says this depends on the technique. I stab quickly and patients don't seem to mind more than usual. Well, that's good. You distract them. You had one once and only once. He said never gonna happen again. I've only had an RT do it. Yeah. I love my RTs. I will tell you, I'm a critical care NP and I do intubations, I do VAS casts, I do central lines, I do chest tubes, I do sort of kind of bronchs. What else do I do? Introducers, that kind of thing. The hardest procedure of all of them, a radial arterial line. The hardest procedure, hands down. I think anybody would tell you that, because in particular, because in our population, right, they have no blood pressure, right? So they're clamped down and it's small anyways. And they're third spacing a lot. It's hard. Even with an ultrasound, it is hard to get just in that teeny tiny little artery. It's thick walled. You can puncture it and go right through it. And then it's very finessed process and procedure. So when those RTs come in and they just pop it in, I always stop and make a point to say that was phenomenal. I just want you to know that is the hardest thing I do. I may get sterile and it takes me 45 minutes to do a freaking big procedure. That one's harder. I've also drawn all my labs via the brachial artery and the AC fossa when we can't get, brachial is probably the next get. I don't do axillary. I get a little bit nervous doing that. Our physicians do that, but I'll do brachials. I don't put a brachial line in. I don't really know why. but I'll do brachial sticks. Typically what I'll do is go straight for a femoral because it is super fast. And a femoral arterial line is 180 degrees different than a radial arterial line. Like, it is so easy. You can really do it blind. I do it a lot in codes. Yeah. Okay. So where are we at here? Let me redirect. We talked about the pros of a VBG. Let's talk about the cons. There are reasons that will invalidate your VBG results, one of which is prolonged tourniquet use. You're not going to get that with an arterial sample, right? Also, if the sample it's different than a traditional, like any kind of other serum lab value, it can't sit. You have to immediately run it. You want no air bubbles in it. It has to be processed well. If it is delayed at all, it has to be on ice, kind of like an ABG. So you've got to have like an RT right there ready to run it. And I see delays happen a lot more in reality. So it's like, is this result really real? So that's one thing. The second thing, and probably the most important thing, is this. In this specific subset of population, there are a multitude of studies that demonstrate that there is a wide variability between the pH of the PCO2 and the VBG and the ABG. Okay, so let me read off the population of people to you. Okay, circulatory shock, MAP less than 60, cardiac index less than 1, significant hypoxia, or mechanically ventilated. Now, let me ask you this. How many ICU patients do you know that don't fall into that class? Oh, wait. Like, very few, right? Very, very few. So if this population of people invalidates a VBG, why am I even doing it? Now I'll tell you, and I'm going to go into some of the studies that demonstrate why, because there are, because it's kind of all over the place, but I'm going to stand behind my argument here. I think there's good evidence to support this. Last night I did an N of 1 in my world, little anecdotal study. I had a patient that we were drawing an ABG and a VBG simultaneously, who was on 2, going on her 3rd pressor, and was not intubated though. I was not really profoundly hypoxic, but massive shock, right? Okay. They correlated well. They correlated very well based on the conversion that we would do. So I don't know what that means, but again, it's an N of 1 and it's anecdotal, but it is what it is. I was kind of surprised. I was expecting it to like support my whole argument that no way, we can't use the VBG with people. Okay, Scott says, RNs have been allowed to draw ABDs in a lot of places I've worked, but many of them don't like to do it. We have to get permission to do femoral stick it femoral. Yeah, RNs where I work could never do femorals, which is kind of weird to me because especially, well, it's just easier. Yeah, I think I will tell you, particularly working nights, I don't know if this is going to sound bad. I find that this newer generation of nurses who are out there are less eager to learn new skills. So they are very, very quick to call the IV team. Very, very quick to call me to put in a central line. And I'm like, let's put a tourniquet on and let's look first, you know? So I try and do a lot of teaching and imparting wisdom, but I don't know how much of it is really received. So it's interesting, very interesting. N of 1, I just fell in love with you. It's my own personal study. So it's, you know, my opinion is all that matters, right? Who needs evidence? Oh my God, I'm gonna have to strike that from the record. If any doctor ever watches this back, they would like roast me. NP. All right, let me pause my thoughts for a minute and get started here. We're 20 minutes into it and no makeup. I know y'all are disappointed. Disappointed. I did already put my lotion on to hydrate this dry tissue. I'm using a new concealer. Well, it's not new. It's used to be my concealer that my daughter stole. It's Tarte. It's not Shape Tape. It's creaseless concealer. It's a super expensive one, but I don't know. I just wasn't digging the last one. I had a lecture where the instructor went on and on about her own experience with different antihistamines. All I kept thinking was, great, you're into, well, it's true. I mean, and definitely if you're in education, you need to present an unbiased unbiased presentation. I mean, in any subject, right? I mean, I don't like, even my kids who are like in middle school, I don't like when like they're in a civics class and it's clear that the teacher has some preferences that they're kind of like pushing on my kid. Not that they're pushing on my kid, but I feel like you've got to be impartial when you're in those kind of roles. Having said that, this is my own forum and I don't have to be impartial. No, I really do try to. So in the blog and actually in the description of this video, oh my God, this is aggressive. In the description of this video, I put, I think 4 or 5 different PubMed articles and one of my favorite, the Palm Crit, and a couple others that I think are really helpful. Are y'all having the same heat wave we're having? Holy cow. I have a fan going in the background. Hopefully it's not distracting the noise here, but it was 82 degrees in Georgia and it was the hottest day it has ever been on record in February. Oh my, I don't know what happened. I'm so glad y'all are witness to this. I think I got a little aggressive. I'm gonna have to figure out a way to. Hold on, hold please. Raccoon eyes, yeah, that's the look I was going for, right? This little container that Hannah stole from me that I stole back, it's very, like, there's not a lot in it. And I think I just aggressively tried to get product. They're calling for snow in the Bay Area in the LA. It's a world gone mad. Windy and warm here. Yeah, like seriously, okay, Georgia is always on crack. It doesn't know what's up or what's down. It depends on if it's high at the moment or not. We are notorious for that kind of thing. Like it'll be 71 week and 30 the next week. But this is pretty dramatic. But somebody was calling it fall spring. Like, dude, it's fall summer, 82. My birthday's March 11th. It always snows like the week before or the week after my birthday. So this is definitely fall summer. We will get a snowstorm. Hopefully it won't be next week because this is when everybody gets sick, right? These major swings. Snow in San Francisco. You know, I was thinking the same thing. Snow in San Francisco. I've never been to San Francisco. I've been to LA. We need to have a serious chat with, who's that? I don't even know who that is. Somebody Phil. I can't even pronounce that. Okay. All right. Let me get finished here. All right. We were at, what point were we at here? We were at the point where we were talking about what invalidates a VBG. Okay. So we discussed that. All right, so here I have listed the different studies. All right. There's a couple of ED docs who have really good, well-written articles about why they use a VBG. Some of them are a little bit on the older side, like 2018 level. And at that time, there were already a couple studies saying that in this particular population that I already described, it's not valid. But in a lot of other people it is. But prior to that, there was mostly just research that said that the two do correlate well. And we're talking about the pH and the PCO2 on a VBG equaling that of a ABG once you do the conversion or whatever, which I'm going to tell you all about at the end. One of them, I mean, I can't read these off to you, but they're in the description below, so check that. Also, if you're new joining this, or I'm sorry, if you're watching this on playback, if you hit that live chat button on your phone or your computer, it'll show you the commentary, so you can see what people were saying. Okay, so there's one study, and I didn't even write down the year. I just put the DOI down, but that initial study said that there's good correlation. Then there's another study that found that the pH correlates well, but not the PCO2. But because of that, it didn't recommend exchanging one for the other. Then there are a couple of systematic reviews, which in the world of research, which I hate, I'm not even going to pretend that I can talk intelligently about research terms, but This I do know. Systematic reviews and meta-analyses are the be-all end-all, because that is a review of other studies. So that is looking at like Medline or government, like NIH, medical journal articles. What's the word I'm trying to use? Platform that lists them all out, right? So it's reviewing those, and it's reviewing multiple different studies, and then comparing the evidence from those, but like with all the statistical terms, you know, all the stuff to make sure they're correcting for all the variabilities and things. So those are like the be all end all, right? Because that's looking at studies of studies. It's a study of studies. So you're looking at multiple different studies. So there are two meta-analyses. One was a meta-analysis, one was a Medline review that demonstrated that there is too much variability between the two to significant, or to what am I trying to say? To standardize correlating the two. One of them was a 2021 meta-analysis from, it was an anesthesia and analgesia publication. And in that one, they found the mean difference between the pH and the PCO2 could be up to 4-fold difference. And this will kind of have some more relevance once we get to the end and I show you how to convert it, because the conversion between the VBG and the ABG is very minuscule. But if you multiply that by 4, so like a normal, let me give you an example. A normal, where did I put it at? All right, typically a VBG PCO2 of 40 will equate to an ABG PCO2 of 35. You subtract 5. But in any of those settings, like we talked about before, there's so much variability. It could be up to 4 times as much a difference. So because you're usually subtracting 5, it could be a subtraction of 20. So your PCO2 on the ABG could actually be anywhere from 35 to 20, which is a difference between normal and very abnormal. So where does it fall on that range, right? And that's the problem, is you don't know at what point the severity and the difference is. It could be minimal difference, like my N of 1 last night, or it could be significant difference. So how can you really base a lot of the decisions you're making on that? So that's one thing. And then another example would be like the pH on a VBG of 7.2 would typically convert to 7.25 on an ABG, because you typically add 0.05. Well, 4-fold difference. Okay, this is what a 4-fold difference would be. It would be a pH of 7.25 to 7.45. Again, acidotic and getting to be like pretty nerve-wracking acidosis, because 7.2 is kind of a marker for badness for a lot of things, to 7.45, which is headed towards alkalosis. So what is it? What is it? You get my point here? Like, this is just like, it's too wide of a variation to put any clinical relevance on it, particularly if you're making big decisions. So that's why I kind of prefer an ABG in those kind of settings. Now, settings in which I would use a VBG, like DKA, COPD, where I just want to trend the PCO2 and see where they're at, but they're looking kind of clinically okay. I just want to see the trends. But you can make an argument that an end title would give you the same information. Okay, so maybe I should put them back on. Mr. Midwife says meta-analysis is the summum bonum of all other studies on that topic. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds really cool. Scott says this sounds like a lot of work to choose the right patients for this method and then do the calculation. Is it really that hard to get? Well, that's the whole argument, right? Is it really that hard? I don't think so. However, you will find once you go into this provider role, particularly when you're going to the ER where things are busy and fast paced, and you got to hunt down your RT, and then you got to wait. It can take a little while. And if you got to make a rapid decision, you know, okay. This is my weekly bubbly. I know sometimes it looks like a Heineken. It's not. I am not drinking beer before I go to work. That would not go well, because I'm a lightweight, and as proven by this weekend's activities, it really only takes like 2 martinis, and I'm a fun person to be around. I mean, even more so than normally. Okay, let me do a little contouring here for a minute. All the things that I should have set out in advance and I didn't. Hold on. Brushes are what make things pretty. You can have all the great makeup in the world, but brushes, good brushes, make it go on like butter. The highest good. Oh, summon Bunham. Bonham? Is this a military term or is this Latin? Maybe that's Latin. I'm so smart. Okay. Contouring. Using my daughter's Anastasia of Beverly Hills in the color bronzed. We're putting high on the cheekbones because old bones like things to be lifted because in fact it is sagging in reality. So high on the cheekbones. I was struggling for the right words. Latin words are hard. Words are so hard. That should be my merch, Scott. Words are hard. Words are hard. I just had an eye procedure and now I can very clearly just see how I'm aging. Oh no. Listen, I talk about aging a lot because I don't really want to age, but it's a privilege denied to many, isn't it? And there's always Botox. I got Botox for the first time ever, just a couple weeks ago. And it's an addiction. You can totally see why it's an addiction. Okay. I think now I can kind of move on. The basics are done. The basics are good to go at this point. Blend it all out. Watch how you use the word old there, sister. I know. Well, you know, age is just a number, right? It's how you feel. With this event that we had this weekend, it was basically a sorority reunion. I saw people I haven't seen in 25 years. You want to talk about this is how you know you're aging, right? We're sitting at this luncheon and every one of us pull out our readers. Nobody can see anything. And we had all these like old scrapbooks out and God, I looked like a baby when I was 20. This is why when I was a brand new nurse at 22, I remember going into patients' rooms and they would kick me out because they're like, no, you're a student nurse. I look like a baby. So this is a good thing, I guess, because now it's like not quite as bad. Not as bad as it could be. My grandmother used to say, aging is not for the faint of heart, Brianna. I would not advise it. I said, Mimi, I don't really think I have a choice there. But I get your point. Things just creak where they shouldn't creak. The eyes going fast. My eyesight has always been great. My hearing is bad. My eyesight has always been great. And it has been a claim to fame that I've never had to wear glasses. And all of a sudden, I turned 45 and it's like within 6 months, I went from no glasses to I can't read crap. I can't read anything. The women in my high school class aged very well. We had a reunion a few years back. Wow. I don't think I could do a high school reunion. That takes some bravery that I don't think I have. College, okay, sure. But high school, I don't know that I could do it. But yeah. I mean, I feel like women have a little bit of an advantage here because makeup, right? Makeup, we can catfish. We can just hide it. And all right. But I would definitely say, I will say this, and my kids say this all the time. I had a glow up. If I showed you pictures of me from high school, you'd be like, what the heck? My best friend and I were looking at pictures. We had these like fake glamour shots. Glamour shots were all the thing back in early 90s, but they were so expensive. And, you know, you went into the studio, they put you in these like rhinestone outfits and like huge amounts of makeup and curled your hair really big. And they were so great. We can afford them. So the school did like a knockoff version of it. So she and I, maybe I'll get brave and post it one day. Oh, it's so bad, y'all. I had on this blue, like heavy shoulder pad, fully beaded thing. And my hair was horrible. It's just, oh my God. And then the pose they had us in, like I'm sitting and she's standing behind me. And I was like, were we engaged? Did we get engaged? It's so bad. I look nothing like I did when I was younger, which is probably a good thing in my case. I was definitely the kid in high school that like, I was kind of that, I don't know, I was a little bit of like the ignored kid because I was a little bit, not quite a jock, but I was on athletic teams. I was the kind of the smart kid in some AP classes, but not the smart kid. And I don't know, I just kind of like blended into the background. So I had my bestie from high school, and she's probably the only person I need to keep up with. Plus, I went to a small high school, and everybody was judgy around here. We're in the South. So, yeah, there's that. But college now, we did see, my husband and I met in college. So some of the people that came to our house were like some of my old sorority sisters and their spouses who were people that John knew. So it was really, really fun just to see the interaction of different groups of people that haven't seen each other in so long. The memories was like, oh my God, that was in some cases 25 years ago. Yeah, that was a long time ago. It was a whole other lifetime. Okay, 45. Yeah, 45. I don't know what happens at 45, but apparently it all falls apart. The knees start creaking and the eyes give up. Some of the guys didn't look too bad. Others have become huge. Yeah, I've seen that too from our college. Yeah, I was in a sorority. I was a Kappa Delta. I went into college as the alt girl. Like, I considered myself very alternative and anti-sorority. And I then rushed in the spring, in the winter. So I quickly, mainly because my perception of what a sorority was is not, the stereotypes are true in some instances, and some instances are not. So I ended up joining a sorority that was sort of the, well, they were the wild girls, really. We partied a lot, did a lot of partying. It was a lot of fun. And those girls that I met in the sorority, one of them, obviously I took with me. She was my best friend from high school. And the other 4 or 5 are my best friends still to this day. We have, do y'all know Marco Polo, the app? It's like a video texting thing. You record a video and then everybody else in the group records a video when they can, and you all respond to each other. So we talk to each other every day on that app, still to this day. They know every part of my life. And I keep telling them I'm going to talk about them on here, and they're like, okay, maybe I should get back to ABGs. I've gone way off on a tangent. Y'all probably didn't want to hear. We're 37 minutes into it, so yeah, I probably should. Okay, so then I went on to talk about why the results are invalid. Because we talked about the fourfold difference. Yeah, okay, hold on. So if we draw, okay. All right, the reason is this: venous blood is what's already been delivered to the tissue, and multiple factors affect what was delivered to the tissue, what was extracted from the tissue, and then what is being delivered back to the heart. And those factors are all variable in different people. So septic shock, you're going to have greater extraction. Cardiogenic shock, you're going to have poor delivery. Major shock of any sort, really, you're going to have poor delivery. And when the delivery is poor, think about it like this: the heart is pumping barely, just barely enough to get it out. It's getting to the tissue, but it's going much slower. So the transit time that it spends in the capillary bed at whatever organ system it is in, it's there longer. And diffusion may be impacted by local factors of what's going on with that organ, or systemic problems because of multiple, massive sepsis or something like that. So it's spend more time there. So more CO2 has time to dump into the venous system. More O2 can be extracted depending on how quickly it's moving. And then also how much the demand is at the tissue. So how much the heart gave it and how much the demand was at the tissue. So all of those things kind of change the dynamics of what the blood sample being returned to the heart looks like, and therefore what you get on your VBG versus that same patient. If you draw an arterial sample after that blood has already passed through the heart and the lungs, may not be that bad, or it could be significantly worse. So they just don't correlate as nicely because of all those factors, both systemic and local. So that's ultimately the physiology behind it. And then, Yeah, so I kind of broke that down a little bit more in the blog. I'm not going to go into more of it here, but I break down the physiology just a little bit tighter on the blog post. But basically, I summarized with saying in regards to ICU patients with low blood pressure, low cardiac output, hypoxia, plus or minus mechanical ventilation, I do not advocate for the use of a VBG in regards to interpreting acid-base, PCO2, or PO2. Now, the scenario in which I might use it is, say this patient was a rapid response or a code, then I would get it to see if I had no other way to get an arterial sample quickly in order to see what the hemoglobin level, what the lactate level is, and what the potassium level is, because those are all things that can cause acute change like cardiac arrest. So it's quick. I still mostly get an ABG, but in the situation where you can't, that would be okay. So for clinically appropriate scenarios, anybody who's not in that class of patients and you do want to look at the pH and the PCO2, here's how you convert it. And I say convert it, it's not like an actual, I don't know, it's not like a physical conversion of the number. It is a mental thing to help you correlate one to the other. Like you're used to looking at arterial blood gases, you want to psychologically convert the values of the pH and the PCO2 on the VBG to match what you're used to seeing in an arterial sample, so you know how bad it is. So you can effectively group it in badness level. Words are really hard today. But people who are good at them, who do them a lot, you don't even have to do this because you're already converting it in your brain. And there are apps, you can do this on different apps. I use MediCalc and MDCalc. I have two different medical calculators. I like them both because they each have different things. So I don't know why, but you can do it there, but it's pretty simple. Think about it this way. You are going to have more CO2, and CO2, I just replaced the word CO2 with acid in my mind. When I was learning ABGs, this is how it started making sense to me. Instead of saying CO2 or carbon dioxide, just say acid. If you have more CO2, you have more acid. Your bloodstream is going to be more acidotic. Your pH is going to be lower. So more CO2, lower pH, more acid. So you're going to have more of that in your arterial system. No, in your venous system. So you're going to take your venous pH and you're going to add 0.05 to get arterial pH, which makes it more alkalotic. It's not really alkalotic, but you're starting from a VBG and working to an ABG. So sometimes this gets a little bit confusing in your brain, but think about it like this. You're going to have more PCO2 in your venous system than you are your arterial. So converting the PCO2, you're going to subtract 5, quotient of 5, to get an accurate, or to get a surrogate arterial PCO2. And because that PCO2 is lower in the arterial blood, your pH will be higher. It'll be a little more, it's not really alkalotic, but you know what I'm saying. It's going to be less acidotic. Venous system, more PCO2, more acid, lower pH. Arterial, higher pH, lower PCO2. So working backwards, you start with the venous pH and you add 0.05. The range is actually 0.03 to 0.05, but most of the articles I look at suggest 0.05 as a good reference number. It's also easier to remember, so you just add 0.05. So like an example I told you earlier, if your venous pH is 7.2, your arterial pH is going to be 7.25. Or you can, with good confidence, say it's probably 7.25. Your venous PCO2, if it was 40, you're going to subtract 5 because you're going to have less carbon dioxide built up in the arterial blood that the tissue is getting. So your PCO2, what I say was 40, your venous is 40, then your arterial will be 35. So it's really simple. It's pretty straightforward. I still have to think about it every single time because for whatever reason, it seems backwards in my mind. But if you go back to that, just thinking of physiology about the PCO2 and the pH in the arterial system being cleaner, if you will. Yeah, it's not too hard. Oh, Nurse Scott says he's a Phi Mu Alpha. Cool. Best days ever. If people say they wouldn't go back to college, I would absolutely go back to college. I mean, being broke sucked, but oh my God, it was so fun. On the blog, I took a screenshot from Palm Crit's, Josh Farkas's platform, And I think it's really good. I don't know if there's a way I can get it up on here. I don't think there is, but just go check out that blog post. Or go look at his site. The link, if you click on the picture on the blog post, it'll take you to his article about it. But he apparently did this whole, like, this was a focus of research for him in his fellowship, where he came up with studies of use of the venous oxygen saturation to qualify the reliability of VBGs. But what he specifically went into is creating an algorithm for, based on what the PO2 is. I'm sorry, yes, the PO2, the venous PO2 is, can help you determine how reliable that VBG will correlate to your ABG. I don't know if I'm saying this well or not, but you start with, what is the venous oxygenation saturation? If it's greater than 75, a VBG is probably very close to an ABG. If the venous O2 is 50 to 75%, the VBG may be off by a bit compared to the ABG. For example, the venous pH may be low, the venous PCO2 may be high. And then the other end of the spectrum is, if the venous PO2 is less than 50, the VBG may be unreliable. But honest to goodness, most of the time when I get a venous PO2 VBG, it is less than 50. So that's kind of how I know it's a venous sample. So yeah, I don't know. I just put it there because I thought it was very helpful. I love algorithms. They're so simple and you can just work through them. But definitely read that article so you can get kind of a better idea of the breakdown of the study that he did. Scott says, I've been going back to college for decades, but nothing can replace that first time out on my own. Exactly. Oh yeah. Grad schools. Yeah, forget it. Whole different ball of wax. Whole different ball of wax. So really that's all that I had on VBGs and ABGs. I think I'm gonna go with these colors. So it's really kind of not a heavy topic. I think it's pretty simple. It was more just to kind of talk about why people do what they do. Why? Because a lot of times you'll hear RTs or nurses or students will say, I don't understand why you're doing this. It doesn't make any sense. We've got a VBG. Well, this is why. So that's that. I'm thinking it's another brown night. Let's hope that that's not an indication that it's going to be a code brown night. We've had a lot of PEs lately. That has been our run. I don't know. PEs are always in season, I feel like. Okay, so since we have a little bit of time left, I guess we can talk about intubation. This was a blog post I wrote last year, actually, I think. But this is a topic that comes up like every single rotation I have with a student, and certainly questions I had when I was a student in ICU, because a lot of times when we're teaching, you know, there tends to be a lot of shadowing that happens. I don't like shadowing. I don't think it's a great way to learn, but there's a lot that goes on a busy day where as a student, you're just watching. And so a lot of times students are kind of just watching me, particularly because I do this role where I respond to rapid situations or codes. And I have to very quickly come to an assessment about whether or not a patient needs an airway or not. And sometimes I'm just rattling through it and I'm trying to talk as I'm doing things, but the question always comes up later on, like, how did you make that decision whether or not to intubate? And at this point in my life, I've been doing it for so long, it really is just kind of gestalt. I can kind of get a feel pretty quickly on whether or not a patient needs to be intubated. But when you're new, I forget, we got to slow down and go through how I started that process of working through looking at a patient and determining what needs to happen. And I think in the beginning, it should really be systematic, because I think when you're systematic, you don't miss things. And it also helps you to learn the right ways of doing things. As nurses, we get very good at, sorry, I'm trying to find the article so I can get back to it. We get very good at pattern recognition. So as a nurse, you can walk into a room and say, this patient looks like crap, they need to be intubated, but you can't really verbalize the whys. And this is something we work on when you're precepting. And that is the leap from being a bedside nurse to being a provider, is assessing the data and putting medical words to it, putting medical diagnoses to it, and how to make medical diagnoses and what pertinence you need, what pertinence you need in order to make that diagnosis. And it always starts with a diagnosis. If you don't have in your mind a running list of diagnoses for what is causing this, you're a bedside nurse because you can see that there's something wrong, but you don't know what it is. That's the difference, right? So with students, learning to speak it out loud, learning to verbalize what the diagnoses could be is the start of determining whether or not a patient needs to be intubated. Because intubation assessment starts with what is wrong with the patient. Why does this patient need to be intubated? Where is this? I know I wrote it. When did I write it? Oh my gosh, I think it was so long ago that, here it is. Oh, actually it was December. It wasn't that long ago. I started this article talking about what the different body systems are that you need to assess for what could be wrong, because it's not just a lung problem. It's not just a lung problem. It can be a brain problem. It can be a lung problem. It can be a hemodynamic problem. It can be an anatomical problem. So there are multiple reasons why a patient might need ventilatory support. And so you've got to work through all of them. And I work through them pretty quickly now, but like I said, it starts systematically, right? What's going on? Is this a patient that you're concerned about altered mental status? Is this someone that maybe had a stroke? Is this someone who maybe is having seizures? Is this someone who is withdrawing from alcohol and is getting a buttload of Versed, and you're worried about over sedation, decreasing the respiratory drive? Is this an overdose that came into you? Is this I don't know, what other situations did I have? Is this someone with a TBI? The ICPs are rising. Is this, like any of the other toxic metabolic encephalopathy things that make people altered can certainly affect respiratory factor, in large part because of the medications we give them to treat that. You know, hepatic encephalopathy, delirium, ICU delirium in and of itself, sepsis will make you delirious, all of these kind of things, high ammonia levels, hyperthyroid issues, Wernicke's, certain cancers, neuroendocrine cancers, like all of these things can impact the brain's ability to drive the respiratory system. So you have to start by, what is the GCS? And the age-old rule is if the GCS is less than 8, you must intubate. I hear that a lot. And I always said this to you. And I don't love it. I don't love it. And here's why. That is just like that's just a guideline, right? That's just a rule. But there are think about this, okay? Think about the Terry Shivos of the world who are in a vegetative state chronically. Okay, is their GCS 8? No, it's not. But they don't need mechanical support, right? Why? Because they have enough respiratory drive in the neurocenter to still breathe. So a Glasgow coma scale is just a guide. You know, you're going to start with that. And then I'm going to say, okay, the GCS is down and they're having issues protecting their airway. They're drooling, they're stridor, heavy secretions that they can't control, or they're on BiPAP and the GCS is low. That's a little concerning. So it starts with looking at the neurosystem. Then you move on to the pulmonary system. What does the chest X-ray look like? Are they hypoxic? What are they breathing like? What is the pattern of their breathing doing? In large part, the decision to intubate, my pet peeve is when people say I need an ABG. You don't need an ABG to decide if someone needs to be intubated. You don't. Is it helpful? Possibly. A lot of times it is. But do you need it? No. Look at your patient. How is the patient breathing? Is their worker breathing high? Do they have shoulder shrugging? Do they have nasal flaring? Do they have head bobbing? Are they air hungry? Or conversely, are they having an expiratory flow problem? Are they in asthma, COPD, where the belly's moving a lot? They've got a lot of shoulder muscle here because they're trying to expel it. Is it a long expiratory phase and they're wheezing and they're moving minimal volume when you listen? So all of those clinical assessment pieces that you learn as a nurse, adding on to what the pictures look like, what the numbers look like, what's the PO2. If you are intubating someone for hypoxia, say a COVID patient, you don't need an ABG. You don't. You can, with good correlation, look at an SpO2 on the monitor and correlate that based on the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve to a PO2 on an ABG. Remembering what your outliers are, right? The things that shift the curve, which is fever, acidosis. I can't remember what the other ones are. Fever, acidosis, some D3 something toxin. I can't remember what the other one is. Anywho, what about ETCO2? ETCO2. So I really like end titles. I think that end titles are underutilized. I love to put them on patients for a multitude of reasons. So we use end titles traditionally in people who we're giving sedation to, conscious sedation, right? But in people that say you're admitting an overdose patient that took all the drugs and all the land, and their GCS is right around that 7 or 8 mark, and you're not entirely sure what's going to happen here, but you don't want to have to intubate, you want to just let it wear off. I think an end tidal is a great way to monitor it. And does the end tidal correlate well with what the serum CO2 is? I think probably so, but you're really looking more at trends, right? If you start off with an end tidal CO2 that is really high and then it suddenly drops, I'm concerned, or the opposite if it's a COPD patient. So depending on the scenario, looking at the big trends. The thing about it is nobody's going to really monitor that end tidal. This is what I've seen in my experience. The nurses aren't going to monitor it. They don't really do that. They don't really know what they're looking for. The RTs, maybe, possibly, depending on how frequently they're in the room with that patient, that kind of thing. So you're going to have to kind of peek in on that periodically. But I think it's a very useful tool. It's non-invasive. It's super simple. It's super cheap. Slap it on there. It's great. I love an end tidal. I also love end tidals in cardiac arrest. Love end tidals. If your patient's already intubated, I love looking at the end tidal CO2, looking at the trends. So all those things are a factor. You can also, fun fact, look at that waveform if they're on the vent and they're COPD or air trapping, asthma, something like that, and look at the pattern of the waveform. If you've got like a shark fin or a steep rise, your thoracic pressure is higher. So lots of cool information on end tidals. Yeah, so that's pulmonary. And in the pulmonary section, it's not just lung pathology, and all things can go wrong with lung. This like heart failure, too much fluid. You can have atelectasis, you can have collapse, you can have pleural effusions that are collapsing. You can have mucus plugs that are collapsing a lung. You can have pneumonia. You can have ILD. You can have interstitial problems. You can have fibrosis, which are also interstitial problems. You can have all of these kind of things within the lung itself, right? And then you can also have the chest wall things. So neuromuscular chest wall, anatomical issues like Guillain-Barré, like myasthenia gravis, like critical illness myopathy, like scoliosis, severe kyphosis, ALS, the list goes on and on and on. So those are kind of more like, I think of those as more like neuromuscular anatomical reasons. Then you can have bronchial issues like lesions within the bronchus, like cancer, tumors. You can have major mucus plugs, trauma, bad asthma. You can have, I already talked about the lung issues. So anyways, a lot of different things within the pulmonary system can go wrong. And then the third reason would be hemodynamic instability. So like a bad PE, pulmonary hypertension, cardiac arrest, severe shock, MI, heart failure, significant arrhythmias. So the problem there is not necessarily a ventilatory one, but it's more oxygen delivery. So you want to help support the body in that. So anyways, all of the millions of reasons in which you are scary smart. Oh my gosh, thank you. I just pretend like you. I will say this. I have been a nurse for a long time. I never stop learning. I learn from every single person I meet. The smartest ventilator person I've ever learned from is Joe, and his YouTube channel is called The Respiratory Coach. Yeah, Respiratory Coach. Love that man. And so I learn from everybody around me. I ask questions all the time. I also love Joe's motto, which is why over how. Always ask why. If you get to the root and the understanding of why you're doing something, even if you don't understand the deep pathophysiology of it, it makes a lot more sense, and you retain that knowledge for the long haul. So always build, always grow. So most of this stuff has been acquired over years and years and years. We are live. He's going to come in or not. I don't know. I'm not lost, but it's a lot, right? It's a lot. And this is why it's hard for NP students, right? Because I want them to tell me why. And you may not exactly know, okay, this patient is failing because they have exacerbation of their sarcoidosis. No. But you know that the issue is hypoxic or hyperventilatory. That's my daughter Paige. Why she always calls during the lives, I don't know. She must miss us. Okay. Okay. So, all right. Now, the first step in evaluating is to tell, Oh, okay. Is to determine how urgent the issue is. And this begins with identifying the problem, which we already talked about in multiple problems above. Common labs, exam findings, and tools I use are anything that can indicate that there's pneumonia, right? A white count, fever, talking about higher cough level secretions, an x-ray that looks like pneumonia, a CT that looks like pneumonia. An ABG, I do use these. I do not rely on these, and it is a pet peeve of mine when people say we're waiting to intubate based on the ABG. Drives me crazy, drives me crazy, drives me crazy. If your patient is COPD and you're worried that the mental status change is related to hypercarbia, just go ahead and put them on a BiPAP. Choose the right settings. I've talked about how to pick settings on that previously, but leave them on it for a little while and see how they do. Okay, the biggest indicator that your CO2 is improving or not improving is neurological status. If they wake up, the CO2 is probably down. If they don't wake up, CO2 is probably not down. And then I would get an ABG and say, all right, where am I at? And I would mostly use the ABG to adjust my BiPAP and or to make the decision to intubate. But I mean, how many people do you know that die of hypercarbia? Not a lot. Now, if they get supremely acidotic and they're retaining volume in the chest, that's a different story. But the run-of-the-mill, like you go and see a patient on the floor, you see a patient in the ED who's in COPD, who's wheezing, not moving a lot of air, you can rescue these people. And that's my thing. Put them on. They don't have a lot of pulmonary reserve. So when these folks get tachypnic because they are anxious, they lose their functional reserve, and then the tidal volumes drop even further. So they're breathing very, very fast. And they're not getting that time to expel all that carbon dioxide. But if you can slow it down with like Precedex and BiPAP, you can turn them around really quickly. Scott says, as a kid, I was always asking why. My parents went crazy. Now it's definitely an asset. Absolutely. Always be curious. Always. This is how you learn and grow. If you don't understand the reason behind it, you're just memorizing, right? Did I already do this step? I think I already did this step. Yeah, I did. Okay, totally did that step. Man, I'm going off on some talks today, aren't I? Just like monologuing like crazy. I tell students to ask why 3 times to drill down on the issue. I like that. And I also like for people to kind of learn their own why and not necessarily my why, which is a big part of why, I always harp on dot phrases. And that's why I write these books, because that's how I learned my why, by spending time reviewing evidence myself. You're going to be told a lot of things by a lot of different attendings and a lot of different teachers and a lot of different preceptors. And if you just regurgitate what they tell you and you don't understand the rationale behind what they tell you, you're not going to grow your practice at all. And you're not going to be able to defend yourself the next time you have to make this call and somebody says, well, why are you doing this? Well, because that's what we do. Nope, no, wrong answer. So the best way is to spend time doing your own lit review. And then this is how I cheat. I will copy parts of it or paraphrase parts of it into a dot phrase. And then I have the camera doesn't lie, does it? Into a dot phrase. And then I have all that literature right there so that the next time I see it, I don't have to go on UpToDate and search through 4 different articles and find it. It's all right there. Now you have to constantly be evolving your practice, right? You have to constantly be reviewing the latest stuff out and learning. But if you have that foundation to start with, a lot of this stuff doesn't change, right? It's foundational stuff. It just doesn't change. So it helps you to speed up a lot if you have it all in one spot. That is how I stopped staying late. Honestly, y'all, the first 4 months were horrible. I mean, I had been a nurse for 16 years and 10 in ICU and 6 in ER. And I had some pretty darn good rotations. And I still, oh my gosh, if there are anybody on here that's watching this that is either in school or in the early phases of being an NP and you are disheartened because you don't feel like you know anything, that's perfectly normal, y'all. I was the biggest dummy in the world for 4 months. Well, I mean, I'll say it started getting better at 4 months. It's not like I magically got smart at 4 months. It's just I figured out how to save my work. I started using dot phrases, and then I didn't have to leave late every day. I still had to learn all the stuff, but I started retaining it better, I guess. That's a great trick. I don't know what we were talking about. That's a great trick on. I don't know. Okay, so other things, neuroassessment, echo, lung sounds, respiratory pattern, including fatigue, high worker breathing, tripoding, abdominal, accessory muscle use, pursed-lip breathing, unable to speak in full sentences, tachypnea, cyanosis, shoulder shrugging, sighing, nasal flaring, retractions, diaphoresis, clammy. Anytime they tell you I'm tired, this is bad. If a patient ever tells you I'm tired or I think I'm going to die, you believe them. So those are all signs of fatigue or high worker breathing. Respiratory patterns indicating ineffective ventilation, agonal rate, apnea, minimal chest wall movement. If you put your stethoscope on the chest and you hear nothing moving. Respiratory pattern indicating hypoxia, cyanosis, air hunger. That's the head bobbing, shoulder shrugging, stridor, grunting, cold extremities. So those are the clinical factors. I don't know why my throat is. There is just a point when you're learning something where it just it just gels and it like suddenly makes sense. You're like, oh, I get that. Sometimes it is years into it, or like rereading an article I read 10 years ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, now it makes sense. It never ends. It still happens to this day. So after you have your likely diagnosis, in real life, it tends to be a multitude of factors. Decide if there are things you can do to temporarily temporize your patient. Are there things you can do to get them by? One example would be the one I just told you about, the COPD exacerbation, which we see all the time, of the patient who has bad COPD and no pulmonary reserve, and they get tachypnic, and then it's all gone. If you can slow that rate with a Precedex and BiPAP combination and give them a couple hours, and don't recheck an ABG for a couple hours. I can't stand this. Like, we're going to put them on a BiPAP and then we're going to check an ABG in 45 minutes or an hour. No, that's not long enough, friends. Unless something major is happening where they're, you think they're about to die or about to stop breathing, don't recheck it. It's too soon. It's too soon. And also set your BiPAP the right way, which I don't have time to get into on this one, but you want a wide gap between the IPAP and the EPAP. Well, depending on what's going on, but in general, you want a good pressure support or driving pressure is the other name for that, to help them blow it off. Or say this is a heart failure patient. Can you give them a boatload of Lasix and an afterload reducer and help get that fluid beyond the heart and out of the lungs? That's usually something that can turn around pretty quickly. Is this an overdose where you think it's going to wear off pretty quickly and you can just stimulate the heck out of them and get them through? Can you Narcan them? One trick I heard somebody say one time, and I love it, is, and our beds don't do this, but they used to, where you can set the bed to percuss, where it shakes them. Turn that thing on and just periodically go in there and push the button because they wake up, right? It's like the patient that you're constantly running around going, breathe, breathe, take a breath. Well, how often can you do that, But it works. And you might just save somebody from having to go on a ventilator, which has a ton of value because ventilators can cause problems. We all know this. When you marry patho with pharm, yeah. Pharmacology, good gosh, that was probably research was the hardest class I took. It was the only BM8, but pharmacology was holy mackerel. There's something about, I was at a really good school too, but the amount of drugs you have to learn in pharmacology and the amount of time frame you have to learn them is, it's not nice. It's unreal. I used, did y'all use Picmonic when you were in pharmacology? It's a paid thing, and they give you these videos. It's a picture, like a cartoon, and they use correlation with the picture to help you remember qualities of drugs, like pharmacodynamics and things like that. Oh God, that's bad. From flight physiology, whole body vibration can interfere with temperature regulation. I'm guessing it has to do for a period of time. Weird. Why? Weird. So shaking the body changes the temperature. But neurologically, maybe your body thinks, what does it think? I don't know. I'm struggling with that one. It's cool though. I guess that's why, like, if you're a pilot and you're up in the air, you get cold. I'm just making stuff up now, aren't I? I think that has to do with the altitude. I think that has more to do with the altitude. Fun fact. Did not use Picmonic. So you just like toughed it out in farm and memorized all that stuff? Kudos to you. I did not bite the bullet until it got to the antibiotic section. And then I was like so overwhelmed that I was like, fine, I'm gonna use it. I'll pay the $15 and I'll cancel it. But it was helpful. Antibiotics were kind of hard for me. I'm sure the body uses a feedback mechanism for temperature, and the vibration must interfere with the efferent nerve signals. Huh. Okay. I'll believe it. I believe your big words. It's interesting. I recommend Picmonic to NPs or nurses too, but NPs in particular when they ask me about pharmacology, because a lot of people struggle with pharm. It's not unique to just us. Picmonic is obnoxious. It is obnoxious. I know. I just learned by drug class. Okay, so here's what's interesting is that's how I tried to learn. I tried to memorize like, okay, macrolides, these are the side effects, this is what you use it for, this is all the stuff, and memorize all the pharmacodynamics and pharmacotherapeutics and interactions for that class. That didn't work for me. That's actually what screwed me because I cannot memorize things. So I got through the class, but when I really started understanding antibiotics was when I started working, and I worked backwards. So I would take like common infections that happen in my world, and then I would research, okay, what typical pathogens cause these kind of infections? And then I would research like what specifically in my area, what bugs are resistant and what drugs treat these bugs in my area. Most places have what's called an antibiogram, which is a local, like literally like just my hospital system, grouping of information about what specific bugs are prevalent in our area. It's really, really cool. It also tells you like the resistance pattern locally. Very, very cool. But that helped me more than anything. Like, okay, in ICU, I'm going to see pneumonia a heck of a lot. I'm going to see some cholecystitis periodically. I'm going to see some stuff in the gut periodically. I'm going to see UTIs. And then that's how I did it. That's how it started like actually making sense to me. The other thing I will say is, depending on what specialty you go into and where you go to work, if you're in a hospital setting, pharmacists are your friends. Pharmacists are your friends. They hopefully are still getting paid very well. They, I think, are all doctorates, and particularly the PharmDs in the hospital love to teach, and they love to be a useful resource. So I use that resource, particularly early days. I got to know my pharmacist very well. I was like, Leslie, what do you think about this? It is a great resource, and they saved my butt so many times. So use your pharmacist if you have access to one. So it's not like you get out into practice and you've got to know every single antibiotic for everything, right? You just pick one thing at a time. With pharm, I'm so glad I've seen so many of these drugs over the years. There are very few. Exactly. That is why working at the bedside is so preferential for what we do. You know, we are expediting medical training because the assumption is we've had a lot of exposure to drugs and diseases and pathophysiology. And so it's just a building phase. But yeah, so I don't know how these nurses who are coming out that have no experience are doing it. I really don't. Kiriki, am I saying your name right? Kiriki? I like it. I love my pharmacist. He sat and gave me a lesson on IVF and DKA. Yeah. When I started at the level 1 center that I worked at in Atlanta, which is, you know, there's only one, but I won't say the name. I was a new grad at 22 in the ER. And I didn't know anything else, right? Because it was the first job I'd had. But the PharmDs ran the codes. Yep. I love pharmacist friends. I think they are an underutilized resource by a lot of people, particularly providers. Kiriki. I like it. What nationality is that? It's very pretty. Yeah, I think that a lot of providers, I'll just use the word providers, don't feel like they need to be the smartest person in the room and be right all the time. And I think it's Indian. Beautiful. So you weren't here for the beginning part of this video when I opened up and said, hello, my prince. Do you know because you're Indian, like you should know her. What is her name? I just look her up because I am using her trademark intro on TikTok. She's so funny. She says, hello, my prince. I love her so much. God, I don't know. She's on TikTok. She's great. Okay, sorry, sidebar. Where are we? Pharmacists. Yes, they're great. Okay, do we want to talk anymore about intubation? Let me see if there's anything else helpful on this blog. Oh yeah, I only got through like half of it. Temporizing measures is what we're talking about. And then, oh yeah, deciding timing for intubation, like how emergent, urgent, or tenuous with careful vigilance is this patient, right? They're all a little different because like COVID, how long do these people stay on BiPAP? Tenuous for? Like could be weeks. And you don't want to do it until the end. Pharmacist and lipstick, the best, the best. And that's a very different scenario than like, I don't know, your pneumothorax patient who you need to put a chest tube in real quick and they have no volumes and no O2. What are you gonna do with that? You know, like that's not gonna, careful vigilance is gonna help you there. So that's why I say it really comes down to you first have to figure out what's wrong. You first have to make a diagnosis or at least have a good list of differentials. You don't always have to know exactly what it is, but a good list of differentials because that will drive everything else, including how urgent, emergent this is. And then designation of intubation status. Now, I talk a lot about rapids because this is a lot of the time the situation in which I am having to make these very quick assessments. So this is, to me, a rapid response situation is the exact scenario that marries a little bit of ER and a little bit of ICU. So I use those scenarios a lot, but in the real world, I see people in the ER when I admit them, and I see people in the ICU when they decompensate, that we have these kind of interactions. But most commonly, it's in a rapid. And that is when you have multiple team members. I'm not the primary team, so I'm coming into this scenario as a helper, as a sidebar person. So somebody else has probably already established rapport with this patient or with this family. Sometimes they have already had a discussion with this person or this family about whether or not they want to be intubated or not. I personally prefer to have it myself. And the reason is this, it's not because I do not respect that rapport or that relationship or want to, impede or, I don't know what the word I'm trying to say is. I don't want to affect that or belittle or mitigate, I'm trying to say, like, I don't want to overstep my bounds. However, I think the best person to discuss the risks, benefits, prognosis, and potential outcomes and options with a patient that needs to be intubated is the person who's doing the intubating and caring for the patient later. I find in reality that a lot of time this discussion is glossed over very quickly, and it can be something as simple as, well, you're not ready to die, are you? Or you need to go on a ventilator, are you ready? And I can come in and pretty quickly say, okay, here's what I think the problem is. Here's how I think I can probably turn this around in a couple of days with some good antibiotics. Or here's a situation, you have terrible cancer underlying this and COPD, and now you've got just enough of a pneumonia that I don't know that your body will have the chance to recover. So we can put you on a ventilator, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will come off of a ventilator. And that helps them make a little bit, they're at least more informed going into it. In an urgent/emergent situation, it's hard for people and they tend to default towards, well, I'm not ready to die, so let's just do it. And that's okay. It's just that I want them going into it knowing this could be the last time you speak to your family. So let's say what we need to say. Let's do what we need to do. So I personally teach all my NPs, students, and on this platform, you need to be the person having this discussion with your families. You need to know what the expectations are going into it. It also helps, even if you can't save this person, this family is going to have to go forward with the decisions that they made. And the way you communicate with them during this very tense, critical, traumatic moment will impact the rest of their lives, because they will either look back on it with major regret, anger, angst, or some sense of peace that they made the right decision. And your role is to kind of help get them there. And it's hard to do in a very quickly deteriorating situation. And it just takes time to finesse it. But when NPs are shadowing me, I talk through, this is what I say, and this is when I say it, and this is why. And you need to be the one doing this, because a lot of people will defer it to the primary team. I don't love that. And then it's a matter of, do I intubate the patient where they're at right now because it's super emergent, or do I move them to the ICU and intubate them there, which I always prefer to move them, but you can't always do that. So all of this, that blog post kind of stemmed from a situation where, a couple of students really want to default to the ABG, the ABG. How do I make a decision on intubating ABG? No, it's not the ABG. The ABG is just one piece of data. It's one in the list of how many did I tell you? A lot of different factors go into weighing whether or not a patient needs to be intubated and when it needs to happen. So that's all I encourage you. And pretty much everything I teach is, there's no one be all end all lab, tool, diagnostic, exam, anything that's going to give you a full picture of anything. These people who die on the cross of a POCUS, point of care ultrasound, it's just one piece of information. It's just one piece of information. And it's also very subjective. So do I think they're useful? Sure. Would I hinge everything on volume status on a POCUS? Nope. Sure wouldn't. It's just one piece of data. So you have to put the whole picture together to see the puzzle, all the puzzle pieces together to see the full picture. And yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. Right, we're almost done here. 4:20. Are y'all tired? An hour and 20 minutes? Y'all are like, shut up, woman. Anybody have any last minute questions or suggestions? I obviously, because I'm behind, have no idea what next week's blog post is going to be, but it's going to be something professional. I think actually, I was thinking mentorship. And why mentorship is valuable, and specific things that I think would benefit new NPs, like not just in the ICU or hospital setting, because I do have a lot of clients that come to me that are not. They're like FNP or they're looking to go to clinic, and they'll ask me questions about onboarding, job, getting jobs and things like that. And I do have some information for you, friends, even though I don't technically work in that role. I have done a lot of rotations there. So I do have some information. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I kind of hinted at this last week when I talked about salaries. It is very disheartening to me that so many of my NP colleagues out in the world that are in unhappy, very, very toxic workplaces are in clinics. I want to talk to some particularly primary care people who are really happy because I get a lot of them, y'all. And it really breaks my heart because y'all know I have a deep love for this profession. And while there are horrible places to go and work for, there are really, really rewarding places to go work. And I think that mentorship is a huge piece of it. If you get into a job where you don't have adequate mentorship, it can make or break you. So I have some thoughts about mentorship. So I might kind of write on that. Kiriki says, I like that idea as a student. I wonder about mentorship. Yeah, it's, I think particularly in this world, like not just NP students or nursing students, but like my kids, right? They're virtual for so long. So much of education now is done virtually that the peer-to-peer thing is lost. And you just don't quite develop the same relationships virtually. So whether it's a peer mentor or a teacher mentor or a preceptor or someone a colleague you're working with, connection is harder, I find now. And this is a common theme in the clients that are coming to me that are looking for mentorship. That's what it is. They don't have someone to tell them, is this normal? Is this not normal? Am I abnormal? Should I not be doing this anymore? It's huge. And if you can find someone locally to you, like within your little micro system to guide you, oh my gosh, it's night and day difference. And not everybody has that. I talk to plenty of people who are very, very isolated in their profession and in their training. And I mean, here's some bias there. I do feel like when we talk and we connect, the feedback I get is that they are very helped and they are very encouraged and they get good advice on what they should do next and how to grow their career and how to be happier in their career. So Obviously it matters a lot to me, but I think that I do all this because I just love this profession and I want people to stop like leaving it in droves. Obviously I want people to be happy, but anyways, all right, a little bit of a tangent there. Miss Midwife says, agree, we have lost our face-to-face. It's not good. I agree. I heard on the radio they were talking about kids pre-pandemic, how many hours they spent on devices versus after, and it's like 2 hours more a day. Now, granted, some of that would include like education, but it's still crazy. Okay, friends, we're at an hour and a half. I have never talked this long, and y'all are probably like, could you please stop, woman? So next week, maybe it'll be mentorship. Probably it'll be mentorship, and maybe something else, because it's not a very long topic. So as always, thank you so much for coming, Kiriki and Scott and Mr. Midwife. I love having your interaction. I feel a little bit less alone when y'all are here. And let me know if you have topics you want me to talk about. So I hope y'all have a lovely evening and do not burn up in the sun when you go outside right now. You're welcome. Thank you for saying that. Always happy to have y'all. Bye, everybody. And end.